Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. My name is Matthew. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by AJ. AJ is the Chief Technology Officer at a company called Torqata. How are you today, AJ? How are things going?
I'm doing well, Matthew. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, AJ. So, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Tell me a little bit about Torqata. Um, Pretend I know nothing. Give me a brief company overview. What do you do? How do you do it?
Certainly. So, Torqata is a data and analytics SaaS company in the tire industry, of all things. And the main thing that you should know about the tire industry, or really the automotive industry, is that it's very antiquated in terms of how it uses, or really rather doesn't use, data to make more efficient decisions. And essentially, Torqata is there to change that. So you have large name players, Fortune 500 companies that produce tires, the Michelins and Goodyears and Bridgestones, Nitto, Toyo, Nexen of the world. And frankly, despite being rather large entities, they often don't have particularly good or accurate forecasts, and you have international supply chains for producing and moving tires throughout the country and or in the world, really, although we predominantly operate in the United States. But as a result of some of the deficiencies in those forecasts, there's lots of stockouts and problems getting the right product to the right place. And that has lots of effects economically. It makes tires expensive and hard to find. And essentially, we're there to help make it easier for retailers who sell tires and auto services, make it easier for them to make better decisions and to run their businesses better. And that's what Torqata does. So we make software within the automotive space.
I see. And I've noticed that recently your company's data has been included in the Auto Care Association's Factbook for 2024. It seems like a big achievement. It's a big event for the company. Tell me a little bit about that and what it means to you.
You're right. It's a tremendously exciting thing. For us, we seek to be an authority on data and analytics in this space, because then we can provide the right and effective, consultative relationship with our customers who span, as I've alluded, from manufacturers to distributors to retailers. And the Factbook is one of the primary sources where participants in this industry go for authoritative information on what's going on in the market. And for us to be represented there is a really strong moment for us. And I would attribute it to a collection of things. It's both the data and analytics acumen and the data sets that we've built up over time, but also in the past year or so, we've deeply expanded our marketing and social presences. Attribute almost all of that to our Vice President of Business Development and Marketing, Jill Trotta, who's joined us about a year ago. And it has just been night and day, the presence that she has brought and helped promoting Torqata as a brand. And us showing up there is just the first of what we hope to be many more such cases, but a very exciting one, as you say, for sure.
All right. Well, congratulations on that. I think it's terrific for you and for your company. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it a step back now. I want to get to know the AJ. Tell me, let's go to school. Were you the good kid? Were you a naughty kid? Tell me about your studies. I see you've got degrees in science and doctorates in physics, and now you're working for a tire company in data analytics. How did all of this happen? How did it tie together? Let's hear your story.
I have to be honest, I was one of the good kids. I have been very keen on math and science in particular throughout my school years, but frankly, all subjects I did relatively well, and I tried hard in school. My career today is predominantly revolves around software development and coding, and which, interestingly enough, I wasn't exposed to at all until college. So I did my undergraduate at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. And that was really my first exposure to programming of any kind. But I became very interested very quickly. I have a personality that tends to have me fixate on things that I'm keenly interested on, and that became one. I jumped majors a couple of times, and for a while was a computer science major, and then ultimately found physics to be where my passion lied. I would say that largely that was because of a combination of things. It has programming as a strong element. You use it as a tool, but for visualizing or accomplishing something else that's scientific. Like I took freshman courses where we had labs, and I remember that basically we were studying gravitation, basic Newtonian gravitational laws, and before you know it, you're painting on the screen a ball, and it represents Earth, and then maybe a moon, and it's orbiting. And a few weeks later, we had essentially a challenge to land the Apollo spacecraft on the moon with our simple for loops around basically gravitational forces. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And even to this day, that's kind of the magic of the problem solving you can do with computers that drives me forward. So I stuck with physics. I taught through college and ultimately pursued graduate studies, moved to coasts in the U.S. and pursued my doctorate at the University of California in Los Angeles, also in physics all the way through. And my studies there focused around the way I tend to put it is we would blow up things with electron microscopes and put them back together in 3D. So 3D image reconstruction algorithms became my specialization, ultimately my PhD dissertation. So think about, you might be familiar with CAT scans, and that's computed tomography. Essentially, you have a sample, patient perhaps. In our cases, it was often biomolecular samples, so protein crystals. It has uses in drug interactions or cells, etc. And you rotate the sample and you take a number of images, and then you can stitch them back together in 3D thanks to some clever mathematics, things with long names like projection slice theorem, and involves mathematics like fast Fourier transform. But that was my primary focus there. So where that translated to in my current profession is that I was not the wet lab biologist. I don't have the steady hands to do it. I can't grow cells. But I had really smart colleagues who were tremendously good at that. What I was able to bring to the teams was distributed systems expertise. So I'd worked on computer clusters. I had worked with building software and scientific computing algorithms in a high performance computing kind of setting. Like that was really where I dug in. I've programmed graphics processing units, GPUs, before with a language called CUDA. So that kind of make things go fast was really where my computing passion lied. And then blending that with being able to create better algorithms. And better here means you could either take the same data set and maybe get a higher resolution 3D image, or sort of equivalently, you could get the same 3D resolution with fewer images. So the implication there is, imagine getting an equivalent CT scan with lower radiation dose, which would be one thing of concern potentially in medical CT. So for me, it was computationally driven software. Now, how did I end up in a tire retail automotive company?
That's exactly what I was wondering. Yes. How did you end up in this industry? I mean, the physics and the science and that, it seems like a long way away. So tell us about that. How did those two things tie into each other?
Well, you might think, but there are some common elements. So at some point, I realized I did not want to pursue being a professor. And if you wanted to be a professor of physics, you essentially have to have a PhD. If you want to go be a staff scientist, work at a government lab, that kind of thing, it's basically a requirement. At the same time, in general corporations, you won't find a job listing for physicist, resident physicist or whatnot. So I had to come to a fork in the road of, what do I want to do if I want to, as they might say in academia, sell my soul to the industry and take a non-academic job, basically. And I essentially had two options that appealed to me. And this was right around the time where data science was really beginning this this kind of boom of interest as a new and exciting job. I mean, it didn't really exist until really the early kind of 2000s as a formal job title, depending on who you ask. And kind of option A was I could have gone to Wall Street. I'm very interested in markets and trading equity options and that kind of thing, and that's an entire rabbit hole on its own. So basically, being a quant was one choice. And the other was this rise of data science, and ultimately I chose the latter. So I had to do a bit of flexing of the autodidactic muscles and teach myself a few things. But as you might imagine, the math and the programming and the statistics that go into that kind of carried over from my physics training. And then I was able to pick up the machine learning knowledge, how the algorithms work and so forth. And I moved back to the East Coast and ultimately began working as a data scientist in startups. And frankly, I've been working in technology, data-driven software startups basically ever since. I spent time in an incubator. There's a facility in Atlanta called the Atlanta Tech Village that hosts multiple different kinds of startups. And so I kind of bounced around there and ultimately made my way up to North Carolina with American Tire Distributors. This is the transition point to the automotive industry, where they were seeking to stand up a new advanced analytics team, which was not a function that had existed before. And although that's ATD, as it's called, American Tire, is a large company, about 5,000 employees in the U.S., the analytics team we were creating was very much like a startup within a larger company. And I joined as the fifth or so employee within that group right around the time it was formed. And the driving intent of that was to bring analytics muscle to an industry that's nascent on how it thinks about using data to make smarter decisions. So it was being able to create a startup effectively in a new team, but with the benefit of the resources of a larger kind of mothership company around it, which was a really interesting possibility for me to grow a team and make a sizable impact, but also with some level of financial backing, right? Having just come out of the very bootstrappy kind of venture capital backed world of almost garage style startups where you really have to look over your shoulder constantly and ask if you're going to make a decision that helps ensure you have a job in a few months, which is stressful in its own right. Exciting, but stressful. So that was how I actually got into the tire industry.
So what's interesting to me is that you've spent 10 years studying with your various degrees. Was it worth it? You mentioned earlier on about experience and qualifications and that, and would you have changed anything? Would you have gone back? Would you have studied less? Would you have started earlier? How do you feel about that? What advice would you give to people looking to pursue careers in PhDs and spend this kind of time studying and working towards a goal? Did you know this is what you wanted to do? Did you know your PhDs were going to work through this? Tie that all together for me.
You are right, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because I have been asked before by aspiring technology professionals, typically, or analytics, if I would recommend them pursuing a PhD. And I don't want to be overly preclusive, but actually my advice is, if your goal is to be a professional, say software engineer or technology professional, I do not think the PhD is worth it. At the same time, and hear me out, I would attribute a vast majority of the knowledge that helps me do my job as a developer, as an engineer, well, to the time I spent pursuing my PhD. But why? Well, in essence, a PhD in a technical field is a rather lengthy pursuit. It's typically 6 to 8 years. And I'll not shy to say, rather motivated, ambitious individual. And so I really dove into my research and was trying to publish early and prolifically, and I want it to get done and go to the next step. I'm on the Enneagram personality kind of scale. I am a very deep 3, the achiever. It's just fundamentally what drives me. I have trouble putting the pickaxes down and not continuing to try to climb the mountain, even if I've reached a plateau. The time that I had during that allowed me to just be kind of exploratory. And what I mean by that is you essentially have to be in a program like that for a certain period of time for various reasons, but you can't simply come in and just publish a handful of papers and just say I'm done. It's not quite like a bachelor's degree where there is a list of courses you must check the box on, and once you've done that, we can't really argue that you've passed and therefore you're done. It's a little more subjective. And so while I was kind of awaiting the completion of long peer review processes, I just kind of explored and wrote programs. I would get very curious about how, like, these are very low level sort of computing things, but how do smart pointers work? And I would want to understand that, and I would write my own examples of that. And I have still to this day hundreds of these C++ files where I was just sort of tinkering. It gave me a very deep, low level knowledge of how computers work, which translated into my sort of distributed computing world. However, the fact that I had sort of 4 years to also spend a lot of time doing that, would I advise people to spend 4 years on that versus 4 years actually working in an industrial sense as a software engineer and trying to climb to be a team lead, tech lead, or IT manager? You will get there sooner with the latter, and you just have to be willing to learn on the job, and it keeps you focused on the most important parts of the job. So, to me, I actually think the advice is to go straight into a career. Possibly pursue an MBA if you want to be in management, or a master's degree. I think those are shorter and high value. As a blanket statement, PhD is a very lengthy commitment.
Thank you for that, AJ. I like your answers. They're very detailed, a lot of good information in there. I hope the people will find the value in what you're saying. Let's talk a little bit about something, the interactions between your business life, your personal life, your work-life balance. Let's talk a little bit about your company culture. Do you have a good work-life balance? Do you make space for that? How important is it to you? Tell me a little bit about what's going on that front.
I do. I do, and it's actually a very sacred and important thing to me, and that's something that we also carry forward into the culture of Torqata. Now, I understand many companies will sell you that our culture is amazing. Torqata's culture really is, and I don't take credit for it, but it is something that I am extremely proud of. But for me personally, the boundaries of work and personal life are a very important construct to keep rigid. I am not a believer that working a 70-hour week is the best way to achieve. Now, just a moment ago, I said that I'm an achievement-focused person, but to me, that's to use the cliche of work smarter, not harder. I believe that if you're well rested and focused and on task within the confines of a normal working day, because humans can only function cognitively at a working level for so long. I'm a morning person. I probably peak 45 minutes after I have a cup of coffee in the morning, and then everything is downhill by there. And my colleagues know it. Like 7 p.m., AJ is just probably his brain's melted by that point in the day. We'll just have to try again tomorrow. But I have a large and growing family. I'm about to have my 4th child. I'm married. I cook a lot, and for me, cooking is not a chore. It's actually feels like kind of the opposite part of my brain. I spend all day with very smart people working on very challenging problems, and a deployment thing arises, or there's an algorithm to solve, or we're trying to secure the next product or piece of funding or partnership, and then I get to go and unwind and make some curry with my kids or teach them how to bake. And they're all small kids, basically ages 7 or under now. And one fuels the other. Because I am somebody who derives at least a portion of my self-worth from being achievement focused. When I have when I feel my bucket is full at work, I'm a better dad, and by being a better dad, I show up better at work. To me, it's balance. That includes health and fitness and music is the other portion of my life. You can't see it, but behind where my office is, where I'm recording now, I've got not one but two pianos. I play guitar. So music, food, technology, and my family all kind of orbit around with the things that keep my life balanced. And at the company Torqata, that's something that we really try to proselytize. I don't like seeing people working extended hours because, frankly, I mean, there's many reasons why, but it leads to terrible amounts of burnout. And frankly, this is going to sound silly, but I believe it. The way that I think about building a team and a culture is, if you build the kind of world where the kind of people that you want to work, they will want to work there. And I'm fortunate to be surrounded by truly world-class talent, brilliant developers, curious-minded people who are keeping a pulse on the latest trends in technology and will share out that there's this exciting new version of Fast API. Like, should we look into using that feature to fix this problem that we had? And people like that, they tend to be the sort of tinkering-minded, again, curious, focused individuals. And that has a way of attracting more of that. Smart developers pick up when they're being interviewed by a panel of smart developers, and then I find that those connections are very natural. But part of sustaining that is you've got to have balance. You can't grind people into the ground, because I'm not here to try to maximize how much output happens in the next 3 weeks. I'm here to look at, if I want this company to be truly successful, we're talking timescales of years. I want to look over the sort of employee life cycle. How long was this individual with the company? And I want them to have been strong contributors in totality. And frankly, I want them, when they move on at some point in the future, to always look back at that part of their resume and see Torqata and say, with a smile on their face, that was just a really amazing place where I learned, I grew, and I was able to mentor even. And that's foundationally very important to both myself and my colleagues on the leadership team.
So when I listen to you speak, it sounds like it was quite a smooth transition, but I'm sure it wasn't always like that. There must have been some hard times, a few bumps in the road. Let me know, was it all smooth sailing? Did you get knocked around? What happened? How did it happen?
Those stones you find in rivers that are really smooth, they get that way because they get knocked around a bajillion times amidst turbulence. It was more like that. So I've been ambitious and driven, but it has not been a linear path, and I was not always this way. The comments I made on being very achievement focused, they can also be taken to extremes that are toxic. And I have been fortunate at a relatively young age to be cognizant of that. And I try to, never stop learning. And that includes learning from those who are older, wiser, or more capable than I am. And, we've all heard the story of somebody who is on their deathbed, and what is their main regret? Nobody ever wishes they could go back and work more. It's that they didn't spend enough time with their family. And how many times do you need to hear that before you realize that must be a very possible thing? And I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that person. And so if there's something I could attribute how I kind of became the rock bouncing around in the stream to, I try to be very willing to be introspective and critical of myself and change things. This also came, I used to be, I'm still interested, I used to be very much into strategy games. I played real-time strategy games, and these are sort of competitive things. I mean, whether it's chess or StarCraft. The thing that taught me, though, was if I'm the only one on the playing field, I can only really ever blame myself. And if I want to get better, which I do because I'm very competitive, I got to be able to look at my mistakes and my flaws and acknowledge that I have them. Everybody has them. And a startup is nothing but a constant moving flaw. You're always at a state of some level of discomfort. If you're not, you're probably not pushing hard enough, right? You don't know if you're at the ceiling of capability unless you bump your head into it, and maybe violently sometimes. So you have to be able to be comfortable in that sort of semi-anxious state and constantly course correct. And it's the same kind of approach that I take in my personal life. So how can I get a little bit better here? And then next week I'll realize, there's a portion of my life I want to kind of get a better handle on, and we'll sort of shift over there, and then something else will pop up, like whack-a-mole kind of style. And you never stop doing that. You will always have some current state that is a little bit uncomfortable and some goal, some target you want to get to. And then it's about, how do I get from A to B? And that journey, whether it's personal or whether it's growing a startup, that's where all the magic happens. That's also where all of the interesting challenges happen, because, and this is why I love startups. I don't frankly ever see myself working in a capacity that's not for some kind of a technology startup. It's because if you look at the landscape of companies, you can kind of bucket them into two examples. It's either large established corporations who, in some sense, are there surrounded by survivor bias. You don't see the companies that didn't make it because they didn't make it. Or the other is the fledgling startup, and every startup wants to be a big company. That journey in between where a startup really starts to take off and where it at some point becomes an established company, whatever your barometer for established is, whether it's an IPO or whether that's you had your 20th employee, it's navigating that journey is where all of the challenges happen. And I'm going to pander a bit to my physics background, astrophysics side of things. My analogy here, though, is what's called a yellow hypergiant. So bear with me on the stellar analogies. But if you look in the night sky, you typically see primarily two kinds, quote, of stars. And stars come in different colors, but the color is indicative of its temperature. Mostly what you see are blue and red. And simplifying it a bit, blue stars are very bright, very hot, and they don't last as long. Red stars tend to be longer lived and cooler. Well, you've got, in the business analogy, your bright, shining startups, but some of them burn out. Some of them even explosively. Or you have your large, stable, longer-term, red, large companies. However, there are some stars that transition from one to the other. At the end of a stellar life cycle, you've fused hydrogen to helium and up to iron, and eventually you might have a blue star expand for another episode. Expands from blue to red, and for a very brief moment, it crosses through yellow. But of course, this is over on a human lifespan cycle or a time frame, a very long time. But for a stellar lifetime, nothing. It's for a flash that you are a yellow hypergiant. And to me, that's what's special about this startup growth period. It's where everybody wants to be, and nobody or very few people have the benefit of having seen that. How do you go from 10 to 1,000 employees? Because the process that works in one does not work in the other. Somewhere along the way, you had to change that. Again, that is that uncomfortable journey, but that's where all the magic happens. So I love it.
I'm going to take us into the future now, AJ. What's going on? Tell me about the company's future. Tell me, where are you heading? What are you looking for? Where do you hope to be in the next couple of years? And how are you going to get there?
Well, at the time being, it's fully seeing Torqata come to that success stage. So, kind of picking that thread back up, we formed a data science team within American Tire Distributors, and we're focused on making ATD better, more efficient. It's a logistical provider. It distributes tires, as the name implies, but that's there's more to it, frankly, than that. And as we grew that team and had made successful contributions to the company, the realization is that the kind of problems that we were addressing were highly applicable to the rest of the industry. Things like finding the demand signals even of what is being sold to you or I as the consumers who are purchasing tires. And frankly, purchasing tires is an overwhelmingly miserable experience for most. They're expensive. It happens on probably the worst timing that you can imagine for the week or whatever. And so we ultimately spun it out into a separate company. Historically, as just an example of where there's just giant gaps here in the data, the industry relies on what we call sell in, which is just shipments of tires into the country on container ships and whatnot. But that doesn't tell you what you and I, the consumer, are buying. Those tires could go sit on a warehouse shelf and rot for years. There's not broad connections into what's selling at the counter. Many of these dealerships still operate on like carbon paper. And that's kind of the thing that we're looking to change, is become an aggregator of transactional data and inventory positions, point to point across thousands and tens of thousands, eventually retail shops nationwide, and then use those signals to again drive those better decisions. So we spun it out into a separate company, and this was conveniently right in time for a global pandemic to take over. So right at the beginning of 2020 was basically the genesis of Torqata, which was challenging. We switched to a fully remote environment and made the decision to stay there. And in 2021, expanded the company from about 15 to 80 employees, which is an example of one of those very substantial kind of challenges to navigate. So for me, we're still, I won't say just getting started, but we're medium started. We're now at a scale where we can develop high quality enterprise software pretty aggressively. I feel very comfortable with the team and the leadership team that's in place. And now it's about scaling our products. So for me, you're not near the end of having climbed that hill, climbed that mountain. And I'm going to see that through. I'm a finish the drill kind of person, even if the role has evolved from all the way back at the beginning where I was more of an individual contributor building optimization algorithms. And now my focus is more on building the team and the culture and making the engineering team successful so that all of the products that we build are successful. I view technology as fundamentally a support function for how we empower and drive the whole business. Once I see that through, I don't know. I'm too focused on what's at the present to think much beyond that. But I can say with comfort that the kind of puzzle solving that we've been talking about in growing tech startup, I just can't see myself doing anything other than that. I'm probably not ever going to be a CEO. I know that role. I just don't think it's the best fit for me. Both what makes me happy and what I'm good at. But with the right co-founder, my boss, Tim Eisenman, and I have worked together for years, and we work really well together. So with the right pairing, I will probably do something like that for the totality of my career. I could never be the proverbial small cog in the big machine. That's just not for me. There's nothing wrong with that other than it just doesn't work for me. I like solving hard problems and doing it with smart people.
That sounds fantastic, and I do wish you all the best of luck. But I have to ask you, because a lot of people are going to be thinking this. They're waiting for me to ask, and I'm sure you get it a lot. Tell me about the bow tie. What is special about it? Why do you have it on? What is the situation? I love it. Tell me about it.
It actually does. So, so the joke my wife makes is that I wear a bow tie in place of a personality. But actually, this particular bow tie does have a story. I've actually mentioned the individual who gifted it to me, Jill Trotta, and this was maybe 6 months ago, and we were together for an offsite event. And I come down for breakfast and I'm getting coffee with her, and she hands me this box, and I open it, it's a bow tie. And it's like, what's this for? She's like, well, somebody gave me a handful, and I'm not going to wear it. And I know you wear a bow tie, so here you go. And so this is my Jill bow tie. It makes me think of one of my good friends.
I love that story. Thank you very much for sharing it. It's quite unique, and I think it's very cool. And the last one then for you today, before we say goodbye, do you have a favorite quote? Some words of inspiration, some sort of mantra that you live by? Hit us with it.
Oh, that's a good one on the spot, though. I do actually have one handy. The quote, it's attributed to an unknown, but the quote, this was on a paperweight on my mother's sewing desk growing up. And it was engraved, and it kind of stuck with me. And the quote is, "What would you attempt to do today if you knew you could not fail?" And I think that's just so inspirational, because it embodies what the way I view the world, of just go out there and try before you're ready. Lean over your skis, and maybe you fall over a couple times, but you will soon find that you have achieved something special, and you probably beat out your competition by being willing to just dive headfirst into the unknown.
That's very special. I really like that. And I'd like to thank you, AJ. I'm going to let you get back to work. I know you got a lot of things to do. So thank you from all of us here at Temi for your time today. We do wish you the best for your future. And we look forward to following your progress and your company's progress. So look after yourself, keep well, and thanks again.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and likewise.